And now our second panel will talk to us about federal lending, problems and solutions. And that's Dave Coburn, Sari Sulatha, and Mark Miller.
Hey everyone, I'm Dave Coburn. I'm a political science major and a senior here at Portland State. I also happen to work quite a bit with the Oregon Student Association. So as you said, we'll be talking a little bit about federal context, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about cost shifting. So for those of you that don't know, the Pell Grant is really the only federally need-based aid that's given out. It's low-income targeted. And in 1973, when the Pell Grant started, it covered the entire cost of tuition and then some. Right now, the maximum Pell Grant is about $5,500, whereas a medium tuition state is about $8,000. And I want to take a minute to acknowledge that that's medium tuition state, which means that there are other states where the Pell Grant is even more deficient. And also looking at this picture, in 1973 and leading all the way up to 1980, there were more Pell Grants given than loans, actually about double. And now the picture has very much reversed. There are a lot more federal loans than grants, and loans more than double grants. And this is another way in which there's been cost shifting to students that burdens them in the long term. And one other small quick note for federal policy. For food stamps, an unemployed person can receive food stamps without much proof. But if you are a student receiving financial aid, you need to have worked a certain number of hours in order to receive those food stamps. So that's just a quick snapshot of how how federal government has also been doing some cost shifting in terms of aid to students.
Hi, I'm Sari Sulatha. I am a senior at Portland State, and I'm a film major, and I will be talking to you about for-profit schools and lenders. Students across the nation rely on loan companies to obtain funding for higher education. And despite this growing demand, opportunity dwindles for many as the cost of tuition rises. For-profit colleges and lending agencies that prey on students lead to a lower graduation rate, and they add to the growing student debt. The national student debt, as of 2012, has reached the $1 trillion mark, surpassing credit card debt as the largest consumer debt in America outside of mortgages. In a document by Iowa Senator Tom Harkin, enrollment for for-profit schools jumped from 500,000 to nearly 2 million between 1998 and 2008. And as student enrollment increased, student loan increased as well. The percentage of federal dollars that go to for-profit schools doubled to 23% for Pell Grants and federal loans between 1999 and 2008. Lending agencies like the Sallie Mae Corporation have found that they can profit more from borrowers defaulting on loans rather than having the borrowers pay back the loans. And in a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau report analyzing 2,900 participants, a common complaint about loan agencies was a lack of options to pay back loans. Between 1995 and 2000, Sallie Mae stock prices showed a 1,700% increase. In their 2003 report, CEO Albert Lord bragged about the large profit growth, citing the collection on defaulted loans. For lenders, a default on a loan is much more profitable, and they may have no interest in the borrower paying off the loans. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mark Miller. I'm a senior at Portland State majoring in economics, and I'm going to graduate with about $15,000 in student debt. I'm here to talk about federal solutions to the problem of student debt. Currently, private student loans are the only private loans that can't be discharged through bankruptcy. The Private Student Loan Bankruptcy Fairness Act, introduced by Representative Steve Cohen of Tennessee, would change this. Under current legislation, an individual in the state of Oregon could take out, say, $59,000 towards a master's degree. But let's say maybe this person suffers an injury and they're unable to complete this master's program. Let's say this injury also keeps them out of work for a few years, causing them to default on these loans. After that, maybe the penalties and fees associated with the default could cause this debt to balloon to $220,000, which is almost 4 times the cost of the original loan. And this story is not made up. It's the case of Cynthia from Portland, Oregon. Cynthia is unable to discharge this debt through bankruptcy without showing, quote, undue hardship, which is a feat that's nearly impossible. And private student loans had previously been dischargeable until 2005, and the Private Student Loan Bankruptcy Fairness Act would restore the necessary option of being able to discharge this kind of debt through bankruptcy. Now, regarding federal loans, President Obama has already set a precedent that student loans have gotten out of control and require immediate action. He signed into law in 2010 an income-based repayment plan that caps repayments at 10% of your discretionary income and can provide for forgiveness after 20 years or 10 years if you're a public service employee, such as a teacher, a nurse, or a law enforcement official. We recommend going a step further. We support the Student Loan Forgiveness Act of 2012, introduced by Representative Hanson Clark of Michigan. If this bill is signed into law, student loans will be eligible for forgiveness after 10 years instead of 20, or 5 for public service employees. If this bill is signed into law, it will also cap interest rates on federal direct loans at 3.4%. If you've got private student loans with interest rates at 8, 10, 12%, or maybe even higher, you'll be able to convert those into a federal consolidation loan and receive those benefits therein. Thank you for considering these important pieces of debt reform legislation. We've met with our congressional representatives, urging them to sponsor these bills. We hope you can help us by doing the same. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. And Dave, I just want to follow up on your point with a question. The new regulations that the president has put into place, that allow for debt forgiveness and, et cetera, are those, is that just, a temporary regulatory thing, or do we need law in order to make those permanent? Do you know?
It was already signed into law. It starts in 2014. Okay,
so there was actually legislation that was...
It was attached to the healthcare initiative.
Oh, great. All right.
As a cost-saving device.
Thank you.
I confess to being a little bit guilty. I haven't shared with some of my colleagues. Earlier we heard a question about childcare, and there actually is a state fund called the Student Parent Childcare Fund that goes to helping students, such as those at Portland State who have a lot of childcare needs, be able to pay for their childcare. And at Portland State, that need is super demonstrated. There are waiting lists out the door and way beyond for our child care centers.
Hi, thank you again for a great presentation by your whole panel. I'm interested in both the process and the outcome, Mark, of what you talked about approaching your congressional delegation. Which congressional delegates did you approach? How many of you, in what setting, and did they give a commitment to supporting it?
Nearly all of us met with nearly all of them. In fact, RJ and I, another member of the class, met with Representative Greg Walden's aide down in Bend just the other day. And their reaction to most of these is that they're just flat out surprised that of the numbers that we give them. They're shocked at rates of defaults, average rates of loans. A lot of these bills aren't even on their radar. They don't really know that they exist yet. So the response has been overwhelmingly supportive from who we've talked to.
I got the chance to meet with Bonamici, and her response was very much the same. The only reason she hadn't signed on to these bills that she could give us was that she hadn't heard of them.
Yeah. I have to confess to being a professor emeritus from the University of Portland, the other Portland school. and one of the things that I was constantly aware of was that students simply didn't have an awareness of loan forgiveness programs. I mean, they just didn't know about them. And I'm just wondering if that's another sort of tack that can be taken in terms of better education as to what kinds of options there are for students.
Absolutely, that's definitely a part of it. Part of what Portland State does to attempt to address this is have an exit counseling program. But unfortunately, the picture is kind of grim. If you look at the current Portland State exit counseling program, one of the ways it lists for you to discharge your student debt is death.
And not even in some cases. Right?
Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Chip Shields. I represent North and Northeast Portland. Also graduated from the social work program here in 2003. My spouse, Shelda Holmes, was the first person in her family to graduate from college, and I remember her having to work the night shift as a certified nurse's assistant while she was working her way through nursing school, and literally didn't sleep for weeks on end sometimes. It's really, really challenging. My committee assignment is to chair the Consumer Protection Committee, and we've been struggling with the mortgage catastrophe, and all knowing that this is the next shoe to drop that's dramatically going to affect our economy. And one of the things that the banks tell us is, oh gosh, we don't want our borrowers to go into default, but yet when you talk to the mortgage servicers, they actually have financial incentive. It's more profitable for them to have somebody go into default on a loan than it is to actually work out a modification, and that's why we've had to codify that into law, certain mandatory mediation programs. And I'm just wondering if you can help me flesh out a little bit more your perception of why you think, for example, Sallie Mae does better having people default than they do in actually paying their loans off.
Right. That's a pretty simple picture. When you're not able to bankrupt out of student loans, that means that when you fall behind on payments, they can simply charge more and more and more and more and more, and you're essentially left with this piling bill that you have to pay. Not paying it has kind of these terrible consequences. If you own anything of value, I believe they can put a lien on it, in which case you really can't do anything with it. And how do you get through life without ending up owning anything of value? I mean, most people are at the very least going to own a car that's of some value, and that is something that they can put a lien on.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much.